Miracles often hide in the plain things of life, whispering where we expect shouts, shining softly where we look for lightning. We scan the horizon for grand, earth-shaking signs, hoping for a thunderous display of divine intervention. We ask for parted seas, fallen walls. But what if the most profound miracles are the ones that unfold quietly, almost unnoticed in the simple, humble corners of our everyday existence? What if God's most consistent work is not in the spectacular, but in the sustainable? Take a moment and consider your own life. Is it possible that a blessing has been placed right in front of you, disguised as an ordinary part of your daily routine? We often overlook the gentle hand of grace that works within the familiar rhythms of our lives. We see a pantry with just enough food. We feel just enough strength to get through one more day. We have just enough patience to handle a difficult conversation. God works in the bread we break, in the oil we pour, in the quiet solitude of a kitchen at sunrise. Hey, imagine a world bleached by a relentless sun, a land held captive by a long and unforgiving drought. No rain had fallen from the sky for many months, perhaps even years. The once fertile fields had turned to dust, cracking under the heat like shattered pottery. The rivers had shrunk to mere trickles, their banks wide and barren. In this desperate landscape, hunger was a constant companion, and fear was the air that everyone breathed. Hope became a scarce commodity, more precious than the last few grains of wheat. It was a time of deep scarcity where every sunrise brought not promise, but the certainty of another day of struggle and want. Life had been reduced to the stark primal challenge of survival. Into this parched and weary land walked Elijah, a man of God, himself tired and hungry from his own journey. The Lord had guided him to a town called Zarephath, a place as gripped by famine as any other. It was here by the city gate that he saw a lone figure. A widow stooped low to the ground. She was gathering sticks, her movements slow and deliberate, her hands small and worn from a life of hardship. Each stick she picked up was a small piece of a heartbreaking puzzle. She was not gathering fuel for a warm hearth to welcome a guest, but for a final, desperate act to light a fire for one last meal. The woman's heart was as dry and brittle as the sticks she collected. Every rustle of the wind seemed a whisper of despair. She was a mother, and her world had shrunk to the singular, terrifying thought of her son. The joy of motherhood had been overshadowed by the deep ache of being unable to provide for him. With each stick she added to her small bundle, she was counting down the moments to the end of her resources, the end of her strength, and what she believed would be the end of their lives. Her fear was not a loud, frantic panic, but a quiet, settled resignation that had taken root deep within her soul. This was the scene God chose for a miracle. Elijah's voice cut through the heavy silence. He did not offer her comfort or pity in that moment. First, he asked for a simple drink of water. But then he added something more, something impossibly cruel given her circumstances.
Bring me a piece of bread, please.
He asked her to share from a supply already measured out for death. With a voice heavy with sorrow, the widow laid her reality bare. She spoke the simple, devastating truth.
I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar, and a little olive oil in a jug.
She explained her plan, the one she'd been turning over in her mind. She intended to go home and make one final small meal for herself and her son. After they ate that last bit, they would have nothing left. They would simply lie down and wait to die. There was no drama, only the flat, cold finality of her situation. It was at this precise moment that Elijah spoke words of divine promise.
Do not be afraid.
Then he declared something that defied all logic.
Go home and do as you have planned, but first make me a small cake of bread. Then make something for yourself and your son.
He was asking for the first portion of her last portion, a test of trust. Then came the promise, a word from God delivered through his prophet.
The jar of flour will not be used up. The jug of oil will not run dry.
until the day the Lord sent rain on the land. The promise was as humble as the ingredients themselves. It was not a promise of a feast or of overflowing storehouses. It was a promise of daily sufficiency, a bold, staggering assurance that her almost empty containers would become vessels of a quiet, unending miracle, sustaining them through the long, uncertain days of famine that still lay ahead. So yeah, that was the moment. Faced with an impossible choice between her immediate fear and a stranger's its incredible promise, the widow made a decision that would change everything. She chose to obey. She turned away from the logic of her scarcity and walked toward the hope offered in Elijah's words. She went home, her small bundle of sticks in hand, and did exactly as he had asked. She took her handful of flour and her little bit of oil and prepared a small bread cake for the man of God first. This act of giving away the very first part of her very last meal was an act of profound and courageous faith, a surrender of her final control. And then the miracle began. Not with a flash of light or a clap of thunder, but in the quiet, ordinary rhythm of the following day. When she awoke, she went to the jar of flour, perhaps expecting to find it empty, but there was enough for that day's bread. She went to the jug of oil, and there was enough to mix the dough. And so it went day after day, week after week. Each morning, she would find just enough flour and just enough oil for the needs of that day. The supply was never extravagant. Her pantry never overflowed. She was never more than one day away from emptiness. This daily provision was the miracle. It was not a showy one-time event, but a steady, faithful, and quiet sustenance. Life went on. The sun rose, the chores were done, and her son played his belly full. The search for the spectacular can blind us to the sacredness of the small. We believe that if God were truly present, our problems would vanish instantly, our empty accounts would overflow, our weary bodies would be renewed, and our broken hearts would be mended without a scar. Yet the story of faith is often one of endurance rather than escape. It is a story of finding just enough day after day until the storm passes. The quietest miracles are not about the absence of struggle, but about the presence of provision within the struggle. Let us then adjust our vision. Let us learn to look for God not only in the whirlwind, in the fire, but also in the still, small voice that speaks through the common elements of our lives. Perhaps the greatest miracle is not receiving a sudden windfall, but discovering that the little we have is mysteriously enough, wonderfully enough, faithfully enough. It is an invitation to see the holy and the humble, to recognize the hands that crafted the cosmos are the same hands refilling our simple jars one day at a time, ensuring we have what we need for the journey ahead. So take that in. Section 5, this ancient story of flour and oil is not just a historical account. It is a timeless lesson that speaks directly to our modern lives. Think about the jars in your own home. Perhaps your jar is not filled with flour. Maybe your jar is your bank account. If you like, you feel what to say, bro. Running sound with every bill. Your jug might not hold oil. Perhaps your jug is your energy, depleting with each demand. The demand from work, demand from family. For some, the jar holds hope. Be out here nearly empty after disappointment. For others, the jar is time, barely enough in each day. We all have moments when we feel we are down to our last portion. We look at what we have, like a little strength, a little patience, a little money, a little faith, and we conclude it is not enough. We feel the same fear the widow felt as she gathered her sticks. We plan for the end of our resources, bracing to run out. But the story of the widow invites a different possibility. It reminds us God often doesn't replace our resources. He blesses what we already hold in our hands. He can take your little bit of energy and make it enough for today. He can take your small measure of patience and stretch it for a difficult interaction. He can take your flickering ember of hope and keep it alive against despair. The miracle is often the multiplication of the mundane. A kind word from a friend arrives at your lowest. An unexpected check, however small, covers a critical need. A moment of quiet peace settles your anxious heart and gives clarity. These are not coincidences. The quiet work of a God who makes our little enough. Let us close with a simple prayer. Lord, thank you for the quiet ways you provide, for the moments when we have just enough, even when we feared we had nothing. We ask for strength when we feel weak. We ask for peace when we are afraid. Help us see the miracles hidden in daily routines. Sustain our jars, Lord, our jar of hope, our jar of strength, our jar of love. Renew our spirits. Open our eyes to your gentle, constant presence. Help us find you not in the earthquake, but in the quiet whisper. There is enough for today. Amen. Look for his hand in the small things. That is where the quiet miracle lives. We often overlook the gentle hand of grace that works within the familiar rhythms of our lives. God works in the bread we break, in the oil we pour, in the quiet solitude of a kitchen at sunrise. Perhaps the greatest miracle is discovering that the little we have is enough for today. Take that in. Carry it with you. Look for the holy in the humble, the sacred in the small. The miracle was not in abundance, but in continuance. See God's presence in your routines, work, responsibilities, and simple moments.